Not this again, no.
Merry Christmas!
Hey, Santa, what are you doing here?
Well, you know how I broke into your house last year to give you a computer to build?
Yeah, a heavy graphics card box in the face sure is a nice gift to give someone.
Oh, I'm sorry, that was my bad. Anyway, this year I brought another computer for you to build, but this time it's way more powerful. Take a look. So here I have for you a Ryzen 9 3900X.
Oh man, I've been waiting to get my hands on this baby.
Oh, I know how much you love your cores and threads. You also have an RTX 2080 Super, 32 gigabytes of RAM, and 3 terabytes of NVMe SSDs.
Wow, this thing is a beast of a system. But where's the RTX 2080 Super?
Huh. Wait, let me check my stack.
Okay.
Oh, I found it! Here! Oh, Merry Christmas!
Hello everyone and Merry Christmas! It's that time of year again to gather with your loved ones and to shower them with your love by giving gifts. And what better gift to give than hours and hours of fun? I am of course talking about a shiny new computer. Last year I covered a $1,000 build which gets you an awesome PC for the money. And this year, if you have even more money to splurge on a computer, then this build is for you. This is a $2,500 computer and it's as amazing in gaming as it is in productivity. For $2,500 you get a 12-core 24-thread Ryzen 9 3900X, an RTX 2080 Super, 32 gigabytes of RAM, and 3 whole terabytes of super fast NVMe storage. Now before we begin, let me introduce to you the new format of my PC builds. Each of my builds will have 2 parts. This video is the first part, which is a configuration guide. I won't call it a build guide because some of you may have been misled by that last time, and I do apologize for that. So in this configuration guide, the format is pretty much the same as last time, where I go over each of these parts in detail and discuss why I chose each of them and some alternatives that you could consider. The second part will be the build video, which will be a lot longer than this, and there you can watch me build the computer and discuss the process as I go through it. I should mention that it's not a PC building guide. I do make some mistakes along the way, and I don't feel qualified enough yet to call it a building guide. Maybe sometime in the future where I have enough experience with a variety of systems, but right now, treat it as a learning experience for me and hopefully you as well. I should mention that this video is longer than last year's $1,000 build because as you allocate a larger budget for a computer, you have more options for what parts to get and how to balance them out. I should remind you that custom PCs are custom PCs, so one build won't suit everyone's needs. Feel free to adjust the parts as you go. For example, if this will be used more as a workstation, then by all means, spend a bit more on your CPU or RAM. But what I aim for with all my builds, unless otherwise specified in the title, is to establish a reference on a balanced experience at that price point. And then you guys can make some adjustments according to your priorities. I should also mention that the lowest prices are taken from either Amazon or Newegg for this build, so be sure to check either website because one may have a larger discount than the other. Prices change all the time, and by the time you watch this, the deals might have sold out already. So here's a summary of the parts list if you want to buy them right away. Links to all the products shown in the video are also available in the video description as well. Now enough with the preamble, let's discuss the first part, the CPU. The Ryzen 9 3900X is a 12-core 24-thread chip with a base clock of 3.8 GHz and a max boost of 4.6 using AMD's latest Zen 2 architecture. On the day I film this, it costs $500, very similar to the 9900K's price of $490, but this thing comes with a 4-core 8-thread advantage. The 3900X also comes with the gorgeous Wraith Prism cooler, while the 9900K doesn't come with squat, but we'll get back to that later on. The extra 4 cores and 8 threads means that in multi-core applications, the 3900X will be around 50% faster for the same price as the 9900K, which is awesome. That makes this thing a much better workstation CPU for video editing or multitasking. The extra threads also mean that there is plenty of life ahead for the CPU in gaming, as many modern AAA titles use around 12 threads, with newer titles becoming increasingly multi-threaded. Now, I'm not sure how many of you are streamers, but the 3900X is a fantastic choice for that, with plenty of extra threads to run your streaming software without running out of gaming horsepower. But what about single-core speed? Single-core performance has been Intel's forte for years. One of the problems of Zen and Zen Plus chips is that they didn't feel as fast as Intel's desktop chips, especially the K chips because of Intel's higher IPC and much higher clock speeds. Using a computer like a normal office computer, like opening programs or browsing through folders and things like that, rely on a CPU's single-core speed because all of those operations are very single-threaded. The better the single-core performance, the faster the computer feels during normal use. Thankfully though, Zen 2 has managed to close the gap and now offers very similar levels of single-core performance. It's still not as good as Intel, but it's very, very close. And that means I can finally wholeheartedly recommend Ryzen for good productivity and good gaming performance for both high refresh rate AAA games and simulation games like P3D or OMSI. On the other hand, is there any reason at all to consider the 9900K over 3900X? Yes, actually, there is. If you are a super competitive gamer who plays at 1080p to get the highest possible frame rate, or if you have one of those 240Hz monitors, like I said earlier, Ryzen, however close, still can't quite match Intel's single-core speed. In 1080p, where the GPU becomes less of a bottleneck, a stock 9900K could be around 10% faster, and if you overclock it to 5 GHz on all the cores, or buy an i9 9900KS, around 15% faster. There's also integrated graphics on the i9, so if someone wants to build a powerful workstation without a dedicated GPU, the i9 really is the best you can get. It's also useful for diagnostic purposes, so if, for example, you suddenly don't get any video output from your GPU, you have an extra video output on your motherboard to try and solve the problem. Let's also discuss cooling, because the 3900X does come with a cooler, while the 9900K does not. However, this build doesn't actually use the stock cooler. Wait, what? Not using the AMD stock cooler? Why? They're much better than Intel stock coolers and we get them for free. Well, both of those are true, but with a 12-core CPU, it does run a little hot and quite loud under load. Now, I'm not saying it's bad. The fact that it's able to cool a 12-core CPU at all with some thermal headroom is actually very impressive on AMD's part. If I were building a system with a Ryzen 7 3700X, for example, I'd probably keep it. But for a premium build like this, it wouldn't be crazy to buy an aftermarket cooler. So, what we have here is a ASRock Pro 4 by Be Quiet. This is one of the best tower coolers you can buy for $90. It has great cooling performance, and those two fans are basically inaudible. This is one of the highest quality coolers that I've ever used. It's got a polished metal base and a brushed metal top, and there are no sharp edges or burrs. And even though it doesn't have a hint of RGB, I love the stealthy black look. Though, one of the downsides to large tower coolers such as this is that you have to factor in how tall your RAM is, which doesn't bother me so much, but it might worry some people. Is my RAM too tall? What if it doesn't fit? Then I'll have to return my RAM and get new modules. Well, in that case, if you are looking for aftermarket cooling while not worrying about RAM clearance, you can always get a liquid cooler or AIO. A 280mm liquid cooler is minimum what I'd recommend for a 3900X. They are quite a bit more expensive, but they won't be nearly as obtrusive when working on it in a case, or cause as much strain on your motherboard as a large tower cooler would. However, there are more points of failure, such as the pump or even a leak. Therefore, it depends on what you prioritize. Better cooling performance for the money and no risk of leaks, or something easier to work with and a more discreet look. Let's move on to motherboards now. At 300 bucks, this is the ASRock X570 Taichi, and it is one of the most feature-packed X570 boards for the money. This has a solid VRM for handling a 12-core or even a 16-core Ryzen 9 CPU. It has Wi-Fi 6, Realtek 7.1 HD audio with the high-quality ALC 1220 audio codec, 8 SATA ports, 3 M.2 slots, and Intel Gigabit LAN. You also have BIOS flashback, power and reset buttons, and a postcode LED, which is nice. Another good $300 board that I would consider is the X570 Aorus Ultra from Gigabyte, which has great VRMs and a very similar feature set to the Taichi, but skips the BIOS flashback, power and reset buttons, and the postcode LED. On the flip side, the Aorus board has individual M.2 heatsinks, while the Taichi's is a single piece that covers all the slots, which makes it inconvenient because you have to remove the GPU to install more M.2 drives. I think $300 is a good amount to spend on a board. You get good CPU performance with quite a bit of overclocking headroom thanks to the good power delivery, plus you get some extra nice to haves over the $200 boards like more connectivity, more M.2 slots, and the like. You can save a bit of money if you go down to the $200 X570 boards, and frankly that's the minimum I would get for a 3900X anyway. But personally, at this price point, I would get a $300 X570 board instead, just for a better overall experience. However, one downside to the X570 chipset is that because of the higher power requirement, it needs to be cooled actively in the form of a small chipset fan, which is a little concerning. While basically every modern chipset out there is cooled passively with a heatsink, which is just a stationary block of metal, a fan has moving parts, and they can fail. Now, I'm sure all the board companies have tried their best to make sure their fans are reliable as possible, but if it fails, it will be very inconvenient to have the board exchanged because literally everything on your computer, like fans, SSDs, power cables, and front I/O, you name it, they're all connected to the board. So if you are worried about that, consider the ASUS Crosshair 7 Hero for $250. Good power delivery just like the Taichi, but passively cooled chipset. You do give up PCIe 4.0, however this is one of the only X470 boards, if not the only board, to support PCIe bifurcation. Every other X470 board that has two M.2 slots runs the second one at PCIe 2.0 X4, which is half the speed, resulting in a bottleneck depending on what SSD you have on there. With the Crosshair 7, the second M.2 slot can run at full PCIe 3.0 X4 speed by taking some of the lanes from the GPU's PCIe X16 slot, reducing it to 8, which barely hurts GPU performance anyway. So if you want the ability to run two full-speed M.2 drives and are worried about the chipset fan, go ahead and get yourself a Crosshair 7. You do give up the least when going with that compared to other X470 boards of its class. But if you're alright with the fan, then for $50 more, the X570 Taichi offers a lot more features. Now for the GPU. Here we have the RTX 2080 Super. This is the Gigabyte Gaming OC version, which actually isn't the cheapest for once. That award goes to the Asus Dual at $700, but really, for a $2,500 build, I'd spend a little bit more for something more premium. This 3-fan Gigabyte card is just $40 more at $740. It runs cool, it runs quiet, and it even has a little bit of RGB. The 2080 Super itself is a very powerful card, obviously not 2080 Ti powerful, but it's 5 to 10% faster than the normal 2080. This means that it can handle AAA titles at 1440p 100 FPS at high detail or better, and 4K 60 FPS at high detail or better. Currently at around $700, the 2080 Super has okay price to performance, but then again, there are no competitors from AMD, at least at the time of filming. So if you're spending $2,000 to $2,500 on a gaming PC, it's 2080 Super minimum. Maybe a 2080 if you get one at a good price, like $600 or less, but at the time of filming, there's basically no price difference between the two cards. So just go with the Super. It's 5 to 10% faster for the same money. Straight line performance aside, RTX actually matters here for once. Not in gaming, though with the 2080 Super's performance it should still be doable depending on the RTX implementation, but the more interesting use of RTX is for workstation applications, such as 3D rendering programs. V-Ray is a ray tracing rendering software that's used in a variety of 3D modeling programs like 3ds Max, Maya, and SketchUp. I have used V-Ray a lot, from prototyping computer builds to generating images for thumbnails. And while my GTX 1080 Ti back there is quick enough, RTX with its dedicated ray tracing hardware will make the process so much faster. For a workstation and gaming build, you are really getting your money's worth out of all the RTX 2080 Super's features. What about if you go up the product stack with the 2080 Ti? Is that crazy? Not really. On its own, it's pretty bad value, but in an expensive system like this, it's not as bad. If we replace the 2080 Super with the 2080 Ti in the system, we get a total cost of $3,000. 20% more money for 30% faster gaming performance, which is alright. And the 3900X and 2080 Ti would go pretty nicely together too. I really wouldn't go any lower than a 2080 with a 3900X though, unless of course you're more focused on workstation applications. So if you want to save some extra money while keeping this a balanced build, I wouldn't recommend downgrading the GPU. You can easily save almost $300 by dropping to a 3700X with 8 cores and 16 threads, and ditching the aftermarket cooler, which probably isn't necessary on a 3700X anyway. The 3700X is a good workstation and gaming CPU, it pairs nicely with the 2080 Super, and it has good life in front of it as the newest games use around 12 threads. Now for the RAM. Here we have a 2x16GB kit of G.Skill Trident Z RGB DDR4 3200 for $140. Of course, you don't really have to go with this specific kit. There are tons of brands to choose from, so if you like the look of another brand of RAM, go for it. But I should point out again that you have to choose your RAM carefully when using a large tower cooler. This Trident Z RGB fits with no issues under the ASRock Pro 4, as you can see from this promo image, but the gorgeous Corsair Vengeance RGB Pro doesn't. You probably have to move the front fan up by a couple of millimeters, which is fine, but you may run into some clearance issues on some cases, which goes back to my point earlier about how liquid coolers are generally easier to work with. Now, Ryzen 3rd gen CPUs, and even 2nd gen for that matter, aren't picky with RAM unlike 1st gen, so you can pretty much put any RAM kit in a board, turn on XMP, and it will run just fine. If it doesn't, the computer may need to reboot several times so it can train itself to work with the RAM, and at worst you may need to go into the BIOS, lower the speed manually by like 1 or 2 notches, and bring it back up after each successful reboot. But it should work out of the box most of the time. In case you worry about compatibility though, these kits exist. This is a 2x16GB kit of Trident Z RGB DDR4 3200, which is designed specifically for AMD because the other kits are actually designed for Intel. This is just $10 more than the non-AMD RAM, so if you're worried about compatibility, $10 isn't much for peace of mind. In my opinion, the sweet spot for price to performance is DDR4 3200. Obviously, the absolute prices will vary between each type of module, like the manufacturer and whether they have RGB or not, but in general, the price difference between DDR4 3600 and 3200 is much larger than the difference between 3200 and 3000. Really, anything above 3000 would be fine for Ryzen, so if there's not much difference between 3200 and 3000, just get 3200. Otherwise, you can stick with 3000 and you will be absolutely fine. Unless you find 3600 for a really good price, I wouldn't really bother with it. For a 3900X and 2080 Super, it's really 32 gigs of RAM minimum, which is more than enough to play any game out there right now, and it's a good amount for workstation use such as video editing and multitasking. Let's discuss the SSD now. Oh wait, I'm sorry. SSDs! That's right, this build has not one, but 2 NVMe SSDs. Why are there 2 different drives? I am so glad you asked. Let's talk about the boot drive first. For a premium build such as this, there's only one option, and that's a high-end NVMe SSD. Here I have a 1TB Samsung 970 EVO Plus, which is one of the fastest NVMe SSDs you can buy for $200, but shouldn't, because 1TB Gen 4 NVMe SSDs, such as the Aorus Gen 4 and the Corsair MP600, are just $10 more at $210. And if they're that close in price, just go for a Gen 4 SSD instead. However, if you find a high-end 1TB Gen 3 NVMe SSD, such as the 970 EVO or the SN750 for something like $150, a Gen 4 SSD wouldn't be as compelling. Why? Well, there are basically two benefits to Gen 4 SSDs. The first is faster sequential read and write speeds. With 4.5 gigabytes per second on Gen 4 compared to 3 gigabytes per second on Gen 3, that sounds pretty significant, and it is, but you won't really notice it unless you do large file copies every day. In basically every other case, the 970 EVO or SN750 are just as fast, if not faster. Second, drive write life. The Aorus Gen 4 SSD has a 5-year warranty just like the 970 EVO and SN750, which come with a drive write life of 600 terabytes written, which sounds impressive by comparison, but in reality is kind of useless because that is equivalent to almost 1 terabyte written every day for 5 years, which is ridiculous because nobody watching this video is doing one full drive write per day. For reference, until recently, I have edited 4K video on my 500 gig 960 EVO, the predecessor to the 970 EVO. Most of my projects exceed 100 gigabytes, with the largest project being the build video for the computer that you see on the desk at almost 300 gigabytes. I think it's safe to say that I use this drive more heavily than the average user would. And in my 1.5 years of use, I have written 13 terabytes to it, which is just under an average of 9 terabytes per year. Even if I double that to, let's say, 20 terabytes per year, that would only be 100 terabytes written in 5 years. 1/6 of the 970 EVO's drive write life. So I don't think you should worry too much about your SSD's endurance. What would be more meaningful is if they had a 7-year warranty, for example, but you'd probably be replacing your computer by then anyway. The advantages of Gen 4 SSDs here are really just nice to haves, and if you find a Gen 4 NVMe SSD for $10 to $20 more than a Gen 3 SSD, then just go for it. If the price difference is larger though, say maybe $50, it all boils down to how much you want Gen 4 SSD bragging rights, or if you can actually make use of the much faster sequential read and write speeds. With our game drive though, capacity is more of a priority than performance, so really all you need is one of those. This is a 2TB Intel 660p NVMe SSD for $200, and it's a fantastic value. What makes this so cheap compared to the 970 EVO? Well, the 970 EVO is a TLC or tri-level cell drive, and the 660p is a QLC or quad-level cell drive. QLC is cheaper to manufacture, but its writes are slower than TLC, as in hard drive slow. But most NVMe drives mask this slower native performance by designating a part of the drive to act as an SLC or single-level cell cache. That makes the TLC or QLC faster because in normal operation they hold 3 or 4 bits per cell, hence tri and quad level cell, while in SLC mode they hold 1 bit per cell, hence single level cell, which is less data per cell, but much easier and faster to manage electronically. So when you copy files to these drives, they first go to the really fast SLC cache. If your file is less than the cache size, the drive will write at its full speed the whole time to the cache, and copy the file when it's finished and move it from the cache to the main storage in the background. If your file is greater than the cache size, it will write at its full speed first, and then when the cache fills, it will slow down to the native speed of the main storage, because now the cache can only be cleared at the speed of the main storage. The 2TB 660p has a 280GB SLC cache, which is larger than any game today, and even larger than most of my video projects. So the 2TB 660p should feel fast enough as long as you're not doing full drive writes, which the average user won't. If you're like me though and consistently deal with large files, I'd recommend a TLC drive instead, such as the Sabrent Rocket 2TB or the ADATA SX8200 Pro 2TB, which I actually purchased recently, which have much better performance, even when full. Currently, the SX8200 Pro 2TB is $240 on Newegg, which is a crazy good deal. Now let's talk hard drives. Yeah, no. I don't even recommend those building budget machines to buy a hard drive in conjunction with an SSD, let alone a high-end one such as this. It just doesn't make sense to put something that slow in a system this fast and premium. There is a place for them though. Are you archiving lots of files as a backup? Because a hard drive will be better for that simply because they last longer. SSDs do leak charge over time, which means your data could get corrupted, and while that's not noticeable within its lifespan, archives could last much longer than just 5 years. They're also more cost-effective for storing media files for a home theater PC because they don't really benefit from fast loading times unlike games. But unless you're using them for these purposes, please do yourselves a favor and stick with SSDs. What about our power supply? Well, at this price point, there are simply two requirements. One, it has to be fully modular where we have full flexibility with our cables, and two, carry at least an 80+ gold rating. The 80+ rating means that the power supply is at least 80% efficient at 20, 50, and 100% loads, and it has several tiers. The lowest efficiency is white, then bronze, silver, gold, platinum, and finally titanium at the highest end. Fully modular power supplies generally carry a minimum rating of 80+ gold, and that's really all you need because you basically won't notice the difference when buying a platinum or titanium power supply, which are noticeably more expensive. I have a Cooler Master V750, and it's a great power supply. My computer back there has one as well. Really, you'd be fine going with an 80+ gold 750-watt power supply from any major company, such as the Corsair RM750X or the EVGA Supernova 750G3, as they all cost very similar to each other at around $120. A 750-watt or even 700-watt power supply is a good amount for these components, because at full load, the system consumes around 500 watts. So 750 watts give us enough headroom so the power supply can work as efficiently as it can, because they are the most efficient when they aren't being pushed to their maximum. And as for the fully modular aspect, cable management is the most annoying part about building a computer. So the ability to choose exactly what kind of cables that we want to connect is very convenient and is basically a must-have with a system of this caliber. So for $120, any 750 watt or 700 watt 80+ gold power supply is a good fit. And finally, we have our case. This one is more of a personal preference because there are so many choices out there. I would get a case that's around $100 to $200, which is a pretty good budget to allocate for a 2000+ build. We went with the Fractal Design Meshify CTG for its compact size, beautiful angled mesh front panel and tempered glass side panel, good build quality, and ease of building it. At $100, it's a very good value for the money. The only downsides are the ports are a little lacking and that it has only one 120mm intake and one 120mm exhaust fan, which means airflow isn't as good as it can be. And for an air-cooled 12-core CPU, it's worth spending some extra money for some fans so airflow is as good as it can be. So, we have this bad boy to complement the mesh front of our case. This is a 3-pack of Corsair LL120 RGB fans for $100. They are very quiet, high-quality fans in addition to being gorgeous. The price is reasonable considering that's around $33 per fan, and you also have the hub and RGB controller, which are required for these fans to work, included for free. But wait a minute, aren't RGB fans a waste of money? Well, actually, we were going to buy 3 high-quality fans anyway, such as the Be Quiet Silent Wings 3, which are $25 a pop, and although the Corsairs won't be as quiet, they are just $8 more each, and they make the build look really freaking cool because you can see the light shimmering through that mesh front panel. And that's worth it for me, because if I was spending $2,500 on a computer, I'd want it to look as awesome as it performs. And I think we've accomplished that with this build. Obviously, it's not going to win any value awards. For example, you could probably put a 2080 Ti in the build if you skip on the motherboard, CPU, aftermarket cooling, and one of the SSDs. But that's okay, because it wasn't configured to deliver amazing value. This is a premium high-end computer, and with a 12-core 24-thread Ryzen 9 3900X, an RTX 2080 Super, 32 gigabytes of RAM, and 3 terabytes of NVMe SSDs, and an extra helping of bling, it's one hell of an all-rounder. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel. Please also remember to hit that bell icon next to it so you don't miss any future videos. Post your questions, comments, thoughts, feedback, or suggestions down in the comments below. And links to all the parts featured in the video will be in the video description below for your convenience for both Amazon and Newegg. And thanks for watching, guys. Merry Christmas, and I'll see you in the next video.